The way Aqueil lays out that very slow but important social structural change is language that you could hear from the NRA, you could hear from. We're talking past each other, but saying the same kind of language. And on the one hand, you think that's where common ground ought to be achievable in thinking about education, about better mental health services. That all of those are there, and that they're not mutually exclusive, and they can be pursued long term and short term at the same time, and come to some of that common ground. But we do focus on guns as the tool and as the most destructive tool, but it can, as I think Aqueil has a point, it can exclude discussions of other. If conservatives say it sounds like it's a dodge and an excuse because nobody believes they really actually want to deal with education or mental health or anything. They just want to avoid guns. If liberals
avoid talking about guns.
If liberals say it, quote unquote, then they're social engineers and they're trying to make us think differently and reject our essential American nature somehow.
Maybe they just want to all take away our guns, the liberals.
But we could and should be talking with each other.
Yes, talking about
we
solutions
have to find
that
a common
both could do.
And it's there. It already is there. The way he's describing it really is the kind of. It can be presented as kind of traditional building basic social blocks of community and faith and whatnot, or it can be viewed as radical social change in the way it's framed. But the end result is this long, slow work of education from the ground up.
That's what it is.
And again, I'm going to emphasize long, slow as opposed to instantaneous results. It does take steady progress, and I think there is a way to give reports of positive gain during that steady progress, so that it doesn't feel like nothing is getting accomplished, and that maybe is what has been lost.
Because you could go to Chicago and you can find examples of grassroots community organizations attempting to do the very things that Aqueil is talking about in the midst of this day in, day out violence. There are people, other voices, other visions there. You could find them in New York.
Yes, sir.
They're there to be found, to be reported on, and fostered and nurtured.
So you mentioned comic books, movies, television, all the media sources that are filled with violence. What do you think about how those should change?
Well, I know how they should change, but whether they will and how they could be changed is a very different question, because there's so much money involved with that. There's such a powerful influences that operate behind all this stuff. I mean, there's money. America is a capitalist society. Wherever there's money, wherever there's dollar, nothing much ain't going to happen there. So,
do you think we need to challenge their assumptions?
I think we should. I think we should challenge their assumption, and I think it should start. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It should start from the top. Our chief bosses who sit in Washington, they should ask the media to change their rhetoric, change their tune. Why can't they show stories of peace?
They could, and I think they do assume that I guess it's the old theater training, kiss, kiss, bang, bang, makes the money, and especially the bang, bang. But it's an assumption, and
look at the blockbuster movies right now. What do they show? Which are these? Computer-generated violence. And people just they love it.
They see that as validated, and when I heard, say, 20 years ago, these arguments against kind of ratchet, what's the right word to use, bringing the violence down in video gaming, and there was a big backlash against that, saying it's free speech, people should be able to do what they wish. As a mom at that point, I was thinking, I know human beings do what they see represented as the right thing to do, or cool, or okay to do, or, they don't know the answer. So the movies, the comic books, everything around me says do this, and it's okay to lie. So, okay, I'm going to do that. And that's seems to be something that people don't like to admit out loud, but it happens to be a repetitive cycle. And I think it's worth asking those in Hollywood and who else to challenge their assumptions. They can make money on showing just simple resolutions of conflict. Those aren't simple, but you can make them into simple scenes and movie themes and stories that are much more compelling than watching the 100th building that you've seen blow up.
And we have to look into ourselves too. That we can't look to someone else, just like we can't look to the government to solve the gun problem and that will be the sole solution. We can't just look to Hollywood and change what you feed us. We should change what we want to consume. I mean, how exciting a first-person video game would be when you're helping someone complete a task as opposed to shooting him in the head. But if that's what the culture can begin from the bottom up to begin to change that. I mean, I just think if you think of films and inspiring, dramatic stories, you think of some of the films that are blockbusters. They have violence in them, but it's not gratuitous, and the heroes are about protecting others, you think of the dramatic
they have
stories.
A story.
The dramatic stories you could have of nonviolent movements. I mean, and the inspiring moral courage involved in depicting that as opposed to
and having writers that have the ability to write stories of conflict resolution. What comes to mind is Zelda. I'm not a video gamer, but I had a friend once that was, and that was when Zelda, which is a game that I really have only never played, I've watched played a few times, but the premise of the game is to save a little girl, and it's based on a story, and it's a very, very intricately developed series of mazes and obstacles to overcome. So it isn't so much, I think today's incantation of it is more focused on violence than the original, but to me, when I look at that and I look at something just boom, 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 blow up, blow up, blow up, do I really want that do I want that as a company? Do we really need to show people how to pull a trigger? I'm wondering about that, because that seems so. I mean, how much more do we need to de-evolve? We have a brain, we have hearts, we have emotions and thoughts. Why not use them?
That's right. I think educators like Mike, I wish that there were thousands of them in this country. They could do a lot. I have a theory which was developed some time ago. It was called the dialectic of conversation. I would like to start a conversation about violence and nonviolence and peace in this country.
Yes.
There is no conversation.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Like you can do this. I mean, you can at least start us moving in the right direction.
I'm trying.
Yes,
I'm trying.
You are.
I'm doing everything that one person can do
and
alone.
You think that ought to be, as wary as we all talk about how uncomfortable we are talking about race and how necessary we always periodically we revisit that, right? We have to have an honest conversation about race, and then we don't necessarily do. And yet that's a conversation that by its very definition is more divisive. But you think a conversation about violence and the ways to get beyond it ought to be unifying. I mean, who's going to be on the other side, glorifying violence and defending it as the means? Even gun rights advocates don't advocate violence; they advocate being safe and avoiding violence done to themselves. So you think about that ought to be a conversation we could actually really have and agree on the basic problem, and then debate the creative solutions. And yet we don't. We'll talk more about other things than we do about violence.
That's true.
Poverty, race, all the other things. And as Aqueil says, well, because violence is just cooked into the mix, or it's somehow only the outcome of all these other social ills. It's not a social ill in and of itself with its own self-preserving instincts, but it is.
It is. I would argue that it is. It's multifaceted. Some say that we are all frogs in a boiling pot of water, and we're not aware of the heat that's rising around us until we've cooked ourselves. And I wonder, have we cooked ourselves?
Well, we are cooking, if not completely cooked yet.
No, not yet.
Not yet. But I think that has to be addressed. If it's not addressed at the national level, at the community level, at the church level, at the school level, I think we are going to be cooked. There would be more violence in this country. There are those copycats sitting out there. Why can't I do it? It's the 15 minutes of fame according to who was that artist?
Warhol. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody is seeking his 15 years of fame, and
sad they don't have another identity that we could help them to build.
Yes. So I think we have got to get out of that, and there has to be a commitment, a national, social, political commitment to address this problem, and to accept that, like racism, like poverty,
gun rights, every American, according to the conservative Republican perspective, and this is not a political show, but just to bring in both sides of this, this is something that is advocated for. Should we ask the conservatives in control to give equal consideration and time to the educational programs for nonviolence?
And we can mobilize. We can declare war on everything else, including we can mobilize for war. Why couldn't we mobilize for nonviolence?
So if Republicans are in control right now,
if we can do it in New York City, why can't we do it in the United States of
New
America?
York City was done by a Republican, famously. Rudy Giuliani takes the credit.
Well, he takes the credit, but I think it was Bloomberg who did
So you
more.
think it's both the Democrat and Republican?
That's right. I mean, he's independent, and he's
independent.
He's independent, yes, and he's investing a lot of money in gun control as well. I would like to get in touch with Michael Bloomberg and say that, well, along with gun control advocacy, you should also talk about these behavioral aspects of violence.
It's interesting.
So that guy has got lots of money, as we all know, $35 billion.
He's not the only one.
He's not the only one. Yeah, there's some people up there who's got quite a lot of it too.
They need to invest it in something like this that helps not only all of us, but a rising tide lifts all boats and would lift them as well.
Political and social conservatives certainly have never proven themselves averse to willing to educate for character and virtue, and even and that can be countered by a more genuine discourse, a more grounded conversation on the other side.
I have to say, I agree with you. A grounded conversation would kind, but it is also true that there is a complex road back, because the bad guys, if we can make it so simplistic as bad guys with mafia type, the individuals who are criminals and or could be bad actors, you might say, have big bad guns. Okay, and so how do we slowly, the small crooks, the small criminals, they would definitely find a way to make money if they could sell off some of those guns.
That can be tried, something like...
It seems to me if we try something, we being the Americans as a nation, it would need to be bipartisan so that we could avoid the mushrooming of conflicts and fear being stirred up to kill something that could be a viable.
Just the Second Amendment thing, which is totally misread and misunderstood. However, as long as that Second Amendment is there, there ain't going to be gun control in this country, I'm telling you. I read a beautiful piece by retired Chief Justice Stevens some time ago. And you know what he said? He said, let's just abolish Second Amendment. And I thought, my God, coming out of a retired Chief Justice, that's powerful stuff.
That is powerful. That's radical.
I communicated it to a friend of mine, Arthur Wilkie. And Arthur Wilkie, in his own way, he said, why don't we modify it a little bit and say, repeal and replace Second Amendment? I thought that was excellent.
I do. What a great plot for a movie. Have a science fiction movie like that. Put it out there. Let people start thinking about it, because, I think that if you get outside of that box of thinking and you start looking at, here's an option, here's another option, and let's get really genuine, healthy buy-in by everyone, both sides, and let's really take a good look at different ways of looking at this problem, because the high school youngsters that came out of Parkland's Stoneman Douglas were powerful, and I don't want that moment to pass, because
not at all.
Their voices represented a genuine truth coming out of their hearts and souls.
That's happening, yes.
And that truth rang true to all of us that listened, because we're all in potential danger. We're locked in because we're live radio.
And I hope that, that Parkland movement has the potential to remind us of the other critical movement in response to the culture of violence of Black Lives Matter, and the other form of state-sponsored violence, of police violence, which
Absolutely.
is just as prevalent but we become more immune to. And the fascinating difference between the Parkland students, white privileged students, and
my goal is to see human energy, television, and all of the resources we have start actually working on the things that we could change. Well, we've sadly run out of time, and we're a little tiny bit over, but thank you so much, both of you. Dr. Mike Sistrom, Professor of History at Greensboro College, and Dr. Aqueil Ahmad, retired Professor of Sociology from Walden University. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope that you continue to do this conversation through the media.
I will.
And maybe other stations will pick up too.
I hope so. We're on 2, and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.